Okay, Andy?
Would it help to go into twos maybe, just to talk, maybe to discern some questions first?
Well, let's see.
Oh, we have a
See what
can.
Andy
I'm
has to
sorry.
say. He's been chomping at
pretty
the
good.
bit
Sorry.
all session.
Just to thank you for redefining, as we all need, the mandate from heaven. I appreciate your interpretation much better.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Okay, another question?
I really like what you were saying around how we need to like level that playing field, and especially with the allocation of resources. But outside of like some sort of awful revolution, how would you actually stand up against the that disparity in pay and disparity in resources? Like what approach would you take, or where does your thinking go with that?
Now, I think it's important that we understand equity again as opposed to equality, right? So communism calls for equality, and I think that there needs to be a level of equality in terms of equal recognition and protection of the human dignity of all people, and equal protection and cultivation of the capacity and access to exercising dominion for all people in a nation. I think that is only just. In fact, human rights law actually says that. When we all signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we all said we agree with that. But now it needs to be built into our legal structures. It needs to be built into the regulations that we have that actually regulate how workers are treated. It regulates the lowest. In America, we have something called the minimum wage, but we're actually pushing now for a living wage, because the minimum wage, you can keep that really low, and we have. Our minimum wage in the United States is like $7.25. It's not much. And so we're trying to double that. And even that really won't help people to live well, especially if they have a family. Can you imagine living on $15 an hour if you have 3 kids? Come on, right? So when we talk about a living wage, it has to do with the question of what is acceptable? What is it? We have created a world, we've crafted a world where inequity is expected and rewarded, because we're all trying to get on top, right? So if we accept that is true, then we would never fight this. But if we understand that the image of God must be protected and cultivated, then when we have the opportunity to pay people, we will pay them what their work is actually worth, not just what we can get away with. I know I'm talking a lot, and I do that, I'm sorry. But I just recently did a pilgrimage for our last podcast. I run a podcast called the Freedom Road Podcast. And over the summer, July and August, we broadcast a 2-part series on the exploitation of non-citizen labor. We actually called it immigrant labor in the title, but I've come to understand it now even more clearly as non-citizen labor, because that starts for us with slavery, and then it moves into the peonage system that we heard about earlier, the convict leasing, and then it goes down to the border, where you now have for-profit prisons that are exploiting low-cost labor for prisoners, and then you also have the exploitation of immigrants in the fields, where they're getting next to nothing to pick our fruits and vegetables. And what I found, the clearest theme throughout the whole thing, is that in our hyper-capitalistic society, we are encouraged to get as much work from someone as we can for as little cost. And in order to do that, our racialized system has taught us that the way to do that is to bring in brown people to do that work. So that system sets up and reinforces a racialized system. So what does it look like then? It looks like fanning the flames of labor unions, because labor unions give people the ability to exercise dominion, to bargain for better wages. It means fanning the flames of a living wage, not just a minimum wage. It looks like making sure that the way that school systems are paid for is an equitable equitable distribution of wealth between school systems. Because I don't know what it's like here, but when we talked about it earlier, that's absolutely true. In America, whatever school you go to, the resources that are given to it are determined by the zip code that you live in and the land value of the home that you live in, which is horrible. So if you have a renter, a high renting district, you're automatically going to have a lower resourced school. So those are the kinds of things that we can do as the church, especially the church in democracies. When you have a vote, it means that you have the ability to make decisions about how the polis lives together. Yeah, thank you. Good question.
Okay, a question down the back.
Thank you. So I actually wrote my thesis on income inequality, so I was actually quite interested in what you're talking about. I would have written about the wealth gap and equity. And one of my conclusions that I would have written about on how to actually improve income inequality was globalization. So what would your views be of globalization and how we can actually introduce that?
That's a really great question. There's a really good documentary that was produced about a decade ago, a little over a decade ago, actually. I think around 2007. It was called "The End of Poverty?" And in this documentary, they actually had human rights heroes from around the world and economists from around the world, people who had won Nobel Prizes in economics. And what they talked about was that the prevalent, the overtaking of laissez-faire free market capitalism is actually one of the things that has created a huge inequality in the world, particularly between the North and the South, the northern world and the southern world. And so when you look at that, what we've done is we've created banana republics all over the world. We have said to particular countries, your country is only, we have looked at them through the lens of a Western lens and declared, as if we were God, that the only value you have to give to the world is coffee. The only value you have to give to the world is cocoa. The only value you have to give to the world is oil, and so on. Gold, whatever. We have commodified nations, and that is a direct result of our free market capitalism that started in the 1980s. It didn't used to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. And when we do that, what we're doing is we've created a whole kind of alternative world that is unregulated, or it has very little way to be regulated, because it's not regulation between nation states as the UN does, but rather it's like a multinational company coming in and just buying up all the land. And how do you regulate that multinational company? That's hard to do. So the best way that I've seen, I'm not an expert in this, but I know what I've seen and I know what I've researched at times. The best way for us as consumers to hold accountable those who are unaccountable by governments, because they have multiple governments they're working within, is through our choices of consumption. So just recently, there was a meme that went out, and thank God for this meme because it actually showed some real truth, that Hershey and Nestle and another chocolate company, they just admitted that they can't guarantee that they don't have children slaves. Like they don't use child slaves to pick their cocoa. They didn't say they do, but they didn't say they don't. And so I can tell you what I'm not going to do for Halloween. I'm not going to be buying that. And I don't have chocolate any other time of the year, so I don't have to worry about that. But Halloween, Hershey is not seeing the inside of my bag, right? The same thing is true for water, right? So water is one of those big resources that people are literally having wars over now. In fact, Darfur was over water. So when we talk about limiting water access between nations or between states within a nation, those are the kinds of things that are usually made, decisions that are made based on human hierarchy of belonging. So what happens when those who vote for the other? vote to maintain and cultivate and protect the human dignity of the one that is not the majority. You have the ability. We have the ability to do this in a democracy. And at the very least, you can call on your representative in Parliament. You have Parliament here, right? Your representative in Parliament to care enough to vote in that way. That's why they're there. They're there to represent you. And they do what they do because they think that they are representing you. So if you're not talking with them, then really you only have yourself to blame.
Lisa, is there any one quick last question, Kate? And a quick last response, Lisa?
Is there somebody that you think we should be listening to, that you can name, that we should go away and listen more to?
Wow, that's a really good question. There's a lot of people. Well, I would say, oh my goodness. I would say that anything coming out of indigenous people groups all over the world. So just watch what they say and do, literally in almost every single area. What they say, do. I think that's actually good enough. Because what indigenous peoples have is they actually, I believe, have a mandate from the Lord to exercise stewardship of the land. And they've been disconnected from that land by colonization, but they still have a relationship with it. They know what it takes to be well, not only with the land, but with each other. And they also are some of the ones who are suffering the very most out of everybody because of inequity and inequality. So whatever indigenous people say to do around the world, do that. Just do it. Follow them. You'll do well.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say on behalf of everybody here, Lisa, your wisdom, your experience, your heart, your passion with which you share it's so powerful, and we are really deeply appreciative of your time with us here in Dublin. Would you please put your hands together for Lisa?